Okay. So welcome everyone, and thank you for coming. We would love to, we've already done that, but if there's anyone who hasn't come here since I said it last, we'd love to know where everyone is from. So please let us know in the chat where you live and where you vote. I'll start. My name is Brett McHargue. I live in London and I'm from Texas and vote in Austin. I'm currently the vice chair of the Democrats Abroad UK and co-chair of the LGBTQ+ caucus. I'm joined tonight by Juan Cerda, our very special guest, Jeff Graham from Georgia Equality, and tonight's event is being co-hosted by the DAUK and the global LGBTQ+ caucuses. We really appreciate your coming as we near the end of DAUK's month of events focused on voting rights. We've had 6 sessions so far, ranging from identifying the disinformation used to spread the big lie about voting, to initiatives on how to make our democracy more open, more fair, and more inclusive from the DAUK Black Caucus. We have a few more sessions upcoming but for the month of April, but more about those later. Tonight, we welcome Jeff Graham, Executive Director of Georgia Equality, and there will be time for questions after Jeff speaks. As is our custom, please enter * hands up to let our chat room monitor Betsy know how you have that you have a question. And as we say in England, she will kindly keep the queue. I'm delighted to have Juan Cerda as our host for tonight's event. Juan is currently serving as chair of our Paris chapter, and I would like everyone to please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you so much, Brett. I have the honor of introducing our guest speaker tonight. His name is Jeff, as Brett mentioned. Jeff is the executive director for Georgia Equality. It's an organization that works to advance fairness, safety, and opportunity for gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender communities throughout Georgia. Jeff began advocating on LGBT and AIDS-related issues such as a college student in the mid-1980s, and has continued his advocacy on these issues since that time. He has been involved in a wide variety of grassroots and legislative advocacy campaigns over the past 24 years, including the last 13 years as the executive director of Georgia Equality. His list of achievements and accomplishments are very long, so we're going to put it on the chat. You can go to Georgia Equality to learn more about what he's doing tonight, what he's done with his life. Now I'm going to pass it on to Jeff. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Juan, and Brett. Thank you again for inviting me. And Georgia has been in the news a lot for good things and for some bad things. But I want to start off the program, and for those of you who were at the ERA presentation earlier where I spoke, I'm going to just repeat myself here. The successes that we had in Georgia, very specifically, the election of Senator Raphael Warnock, Senator John Ossoff, and a special election that happened on January 5th of this year could not have taken place without the involvement of Democrats and supporters around the country and around the globe. And so I am quite sure that there are several of you who were supportive of those efforts, either making donations to grassroots efforts or candidates here on the ground, or the Democratic Party here in Georgia, or actually being involved through some of the efforts of helping to get out the vote through text programs, postcard programs, or sharing social media. All of that worked. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but it is helping to change not just politics here in Georgia, but politics around the country. But that moment in January, and I got to tell you, there is nothing as good as waking up on January 6th and realizing that the work that you have just put into something, and something that just 6 months or a year earlier had seemed an impossible goal, actually came to fruition. And then also knowing that the stakes were so high in this one, that it was not just about Georgians electing Democratic representation to the US Senate, but that we were in the very unique and unusual position of having 2 senators on the ballot. And the way the world worked, we were our votes were actually going to decide who would control a 50-50 split US Senate. So it was incredibly exciting. But for me, it was also a time of really looking back and reflecting on work that had been a decade or more in the making. And that's really what I want to talk about today, is how we got there. And then, of course, Georgia was in the news for those successes. Georgia now is in the news for the voter suppression law that just passed here in Georgia and was signed in. And so I'm going to talk about how our work over the last decade, one, triggered that voter suppression effort, but then what we will be doing to continue to be successful in 2022. So, Brian had already put in there about Stacey Abrams. I'm happy to answer any questions about Stacey Abrams. I have had the amazing privilege and honor of working with Stacey when she was a member of the House of Representatives, before she was elected as the minority leader of the House here in Georgia. I've been working with her as long as I have been an executive director at Georgia Equality. I worked with her a little bit before that when she was a city attorney for the city of Atlanta. And she's just an amazing person and a strong visionary that I believe has a strong vision for Democrats to empower us and our messages to really have control across the country. And if it can happen here in Georgia, it can happen anywhere. But where the story really begins is about a decade ago, 2012. There were about 20 people that gathered for a retreat in South Georgia to talk about what we were doing wrong, why we continue to lose election at all levels here in Georgia, and how we were going to turn that around. We really looked at a political model that was started about a decade earlier in Colorado. And I will actually, I forgot to Google the name of the book before this. I will actually drop it into the chat before we're done. I'll find some way to get that. But Blueprint, which really was for very wealthy millionaire progressives in Colorado, were just frustrated with how conservative the state was and feeling that the state could do better and must do better. And so they started investing a lot of money. And the money was in kind of two areas. One was really investing in a political infrastructure that could get progressives elected. The other part of that was to hold Democrats as a whole accountable so that they would stay true to progressive values. And their work over multiple election cycles, which is one of the lessons that we all need to take away from this, resulted in the changing the state of Colorado and the politics and the political makeup of that state, which has been a central component of changing the national electorate, certainly with the election of Barack Obama as president, but also keeping that going now for Democratic control of the Senate, Democrats in the control of the House, as well as helping to elect Joe Biden again. So in 2012, like I said, about 20 of us representing 12 organizations and then some allies that did statewide voter registration and voter outreach work. Georgia Equality representing the LGBT community, but we had organizations that certainly were representing the Black communities, the Latinx communities, Asian Pacific Islanders, League of Women Voters, Georgia NAACP, some of the groups that kind of came to the table. We looked at this analysis. We brought some consultants in to help us walk through, and we realized that we needed to kind of do two things that followed exactly what I just said, the model in Colorado. The first was building a progressive infrastructure. We needed to leverage all of our resources. So we needed to set up an organization that could coordinate voter registration and general get out the vote efforts in a nonpartisan effort. For those of you who may know US tax nonprofit law, these would be 501c3 organizations working very specifically with a national organization called State Voices. that coordinates these coalitions of organizations around the country to do this work. And then we needed to do the same thing for the harder edge C4 political organizations under the banner of America Votes. It actually took us a couple of years to become a full affiliate of the America Votes table, but this is where you can bring unions together, where you can bring more informed political action that works specifically to support and oppose candidates for office. Those are called C4 organizations. We needed to set up a messaging research hub that could work with all of us on messaging, because that's an important component of this. And then we needed to create a sense of donors. We needed to convince the donor base in Georgia that Georgia had been a state that for the last 30 years has served as an ATM, if you will, to national progressive organizations, to the National Party, to efforts to elect people in other states. And these dollars flowed outward out of a belief that just Georgia was a conservative red state and things just weren't going to change. Good example of that, 13 years ago, my very first fundraising event that I was invited to. That was the 2008 election year. It was a number of national organizations had come together, and someone stood up and in fact, in front of all of these LGBTQ donors, in an election year of not just federal elections, but state elections as well, actually said, we need you to donate to our national organizations because there are important progressive Democrats that need to be elected in places like California and New York and Massachusetts. No shade to those states. But then they said, because there's really no one worth supporting here in Georgia, and no one will win in Georgia anyway. So that was the sort of self-defeating belief that so many Georgia voters, and more importantly, so many Georgia donors had. So our dollars were flowing outward, and we couldn't build an infrastructure. So we also had to build that donor infrastructure along with learning how to coordinate amongst our organizations. The coordination amongst our organizations was looking at data, but then figuring out that we had to look not just at the next election cycle, we had to look a decade ahead. And this is where Stacey Abrams showed her brilliance, because she walked us through an exercise that if we did our benchmarks properly, if we could learn to work together and not duplicate effort, but everyone taking a piece of the pie, realizing that there was plenty of work to do, not see ourselves in competition with each other, but work together on all of this, we could turn out what is called the new American majority. People of color, women, young voters, and members of the LGBTQ community. And it wasn't going to happen overnight, but we could begin to win local races. We could begin to win state legislative races, and that would eventually trickle up so that we would win statewide and federal races. The second part of what we needed to do, beyond just looking at a 10-year minimum horizon, we needed to recognize that messaging to our base, as comfortable and great as that feels, is yelling into an echo chamber. There were folks out there that were voting Republican because they just didn't realize what our values, what our programs, and what our promise as progressives and Democrats really was. So we needed to learn how to speak the language of people, to turn them into swing voters, and ultimately turn them into Democratic and progressive voters. So a lot of messaging research went into this. It's keeping the base and keeping people engaged and informed, in many ways, educating our base on the long game, the importance of recognizing that local races oftentimes have more control over your life than just the president. Why voting for president is important, but voting all the way down the ballot is the way you actually get political change going. And finally, working 12 months out of the year, every single year. There is no such thing as an election season and an off-election season. There's a high time of activity and a lower time of activity, but we needed to be building plans that worked 12 months out of the year and worked every single year to register people to vote and to get them out, turning them into voters all the time. If you can take a newly registered voter and get them to vote in their first election, you've already made a very important step, because a lot of folks, way too many folks, will register but never turn out to vote. If you can get them to vote 2 times, especially if it's in a local or a municipal or state level election, not just in a federal presidential election year, then you've got this person. They will more than likely become a regular voter that will start to vote in every single election. That becomes the key towards doing this. So we just continue to work on this cycle over time. We were able to expand access to the ballot by working with election officials. Stacey Abrams' group, the New Georgia Project, her original group, New Georgia Project, went into parts of the state of Georgia that no one was going, working with rural voters to get them to turn out, working very specifically with a lot of Black voters in rural parts of Georgia that had never heard from a political campaign, never heard from a political party in 20 years, to reach them and talk to them and get them to vote. All of that is what built up to, frankly, the very close race we had in 2018, where Stacey ran for governor and narrowly lost by about 50,000 votes. What we had realized as part of our work pretty early on is that Democrats were losing to Republicans on a statewide basis by about 250,000 votes. So we needed to find 250,000 voters. Some of those came through registering people to vote. We stepped up our game and we were able to get donors to invest in us so that we could do voter registration all year round. And suddenly we were registering 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 new voters every single year. We changed policies within the state of Georgia. So now it's automatic voter registration when you renew your driver's license, or if you move into the state of Georgia and get a driver's license, you're automatically registered to vote. So we're actually getting about 700,000 brand new people registered to vote every single year. So then we were able to start focusing on the turnout. Our tables, like I told you, it was about 12 organizations when we started this in 2012. It grew to about 38 organizations working in this nonpartisan general messaging space in 2020, about 48 organizations, state and local organizations that were working in specific support and opposition to candidates. And that's what led to the victory with Joe Biden. And then we just ramped that up, expanded it, dug in even deeper. The world helped us, and that's then where we were able to bring people out to vote in the early voting period, to flip the US Senate and to win those 2 US Senate seats for the first time in since 2003, that we had 2 Democrats representing Georgia in the US Senate. So Georgia, along the way, in 2020, we were the only state in the country that actually saw Democrats gain in the US Congress, in the US House, and in the Georgia legislature. The Georgia Senate picked up some seats, and the Georgia House of Representatives picked up seats. So in all of those legislative bodies, Georgia was the only state that had Democrats actually gain seats. And if it happened in Georgia, it can happen anywhere else.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeff. So we will now open it up to Q&A. We have on the queue is Patrick. Patrick, you can unmute yourself.
Thanks. This is fascinating, Jeff. And it strikes me that the key, as it is to so many things in the world, is the data. And I'm curious sort of two things about it. First, did you have any struggles getting access to the data you needed? And secondly, you need some really smart people to, data scientists who could manipulate that data and kind of see between the lines of what actions need to be taken, and how did you manage that?
Yeah, so the answer to your first question is that it's always a bit of a struggle, because the data it's actually publicly available data. It's the voter registration rolls it's public information you get from the Secretary of State's office. On a local level, you get it from the Secretary of State's office, but also sometimes election boards. The challenge of that is that, and this is not a partisan statement, these tend to be offices that I think pretty much around the country, but certainly here in Georgia, tend to be underfunded. They are especially underfunded here in Georgia, where the status quo ruling, and again, that can be a bit of a bipartisan statement, because when Democrats were in control, there were also challenges there about trying to get this information. It got even worse as Republicans took over, and you have to have that data. And so that is where you rely upon an effort of, being nice and learning how to talk, to get the information, frankly, finding ways to support efforts. So our organizations worked very closely, many of us, with the Secretary of State's office over this 10-year period to help do improvements of online voter registration, to make the Secretary of State's office a little bit easier and work more smoothly. But then also to not be afraid to use the courts and legal action to force change if change was slow, and to force information to be divulged when it needed to be divulged, and might be slow in coming. And then, yes, Patrick, you are absolutely correct. It then takes people who are brilliant at being able to help analyze this data and split it up into its components. And I really, I'm not the data wonk in that, so I can't explain how all of that works. But yes, it's very smart people. This is where, again, national organizations helping to mentor people in Georgia. Part of our success, frankly, as someone who's been doing this work for a couple of decades in Georgia, is that for so many years, it was the case that if you had someone that was really good at data analysis, or really good at working on a campaign for a local elected official to get them elected, there was no work for them after that election cycle ended. And so they would leave the state. And so we were getting really good people and exporting them out to other states. So part of building this infrastructure was also to make sure that the really good people stayed here in Georgia, and really good people could be attracted to come here to begin with. So yes, that data is critical to all of this, and even data around messaging. But this is then where we also need to recognize that there can be limitations to data. And while data is important and should be a critical part of your decision making, you can't be so married to the data that you can be swayed by the polls, or that you won't listen to what comes up as grassroots expertise. This is something that we specifically learned a lot in 2020. And there were a couple of organizations that specifically work with Black men to get them out to vote. And kind of conventional wisdom, if you will, is that, well, just Black men are not going to vote. So don't bother trying to do specific efforts to them. Don't invest money in bringing them out to vote. And thank goodness we had a couple organizations, and again, some brilliant people that said, no, we will reject that. It's that people, it's that campaigns and organizations are not speaking to the experiences specifically of Black men. And so we need to do that, and you need to invest in that. And yes, Joe Biden won by a little over 11,000 votes. Every single vote counts. And that's also the important lesson. Don't take any vote for granted. Don't believe that demographics become destiny. This is where too often we can get trapped as progressives and lose our way. You have to find a way to reach every single voter and see every single voter as important.
Very well said. Our next question is from James. James, please.
Hi, yes. Circling back to your comment about having to learn the language in order to convince Republican-leaning voters or to, I guess, correct misconceptions they might have about democratic values. I was hoping you might be able to share some lessons about that, maybe some key takeaways.
Yeah, well, frankly, a lot of the work that we have done at Georgia Equality. So it, it's kind of different by each organization, and this is then the real value of bringing all of these organizations to table. We're not all doing the same thing. We are coordinating our efforts so that we are doing our best to reach 3 million potential voters here in the state of Georgia that we believe will vote for us or vote for Democratic candidates or vote for our issues. But then each of us kind of approaches the messaging in our own way. So from the LGBTQ perspective, I sit on a stack of polling data that's on a city level, on a county level, on a statewide level that shows as far back as when I started 13 years ago, roughly 55 to 70% of Georgians support efforts to protect members of the LGBTQ community against discrimination. It varies over time, it varies on the specific issue, but it's always with the one exception of marriage. So we'll set that aside for a moment. Everything else, just basic discrimination, people believe in it. So we needed to remind voters that it's about basic fairness. It's around pushing our legislative agenda, and it's about doing our work to educate voters on our legislative and policy agenda, specifically in Republican districts. This is how we reach out to Republicans. One of the things that we learned through the incredibly successful campaign to earn the freedom to marry is that we really personalize it. We make it about our lives. When I was part of the effort in 2004 when the first wave of anti-marriage amendments swept across the country, and I was on the steering committee of the campaign that lost when 76% of my fellow neighbors, coworkers, and friends said that I should not marry my husband. And that was a really bad day. But we had been told that what we needed to do is never talk about our relationships. We should instead have doctors and nurses and attorneys talk about our rights, and that there are 21 different federal protections that come along with the freedom to marry, and that we should specifically go into this area that did not talk about our lives out of concerns that if we talked too much about being gay men or being lesbians and marrying, that it would cause voters to be squeamish. They would think about our sex lives and then automatically vote against us. Everything started to change when in fact we started talking about the fact that we wanted to get married not to secure these legal rights and tax breaks that, frankly, those of you who are married, you realize the tax breaks really don't exist. But we got married for the same reason as everybody else. You fell in love. You fall in love and you want to stand up in front of your friends and family member and have that be respected. You want to make a lifelong commitment to someone. And more importantly than that, you go to people who don't agree with you and you ask them, why did you want to get married? and they tell you why they wanted to get married. And then you say, and this is exactly how I feel as well. That was the secret to earning the freedom to marry. This is the secret to winning LGBTQ rights. This is the secret to gaining traction on the transgender community that has been so under attack right now. It is about the fact that the couple down the street is a same-sex couple. They've got kids, they go to work. Their problems are the same problems in suburbia as yours. Now we're doing this work, educating folks that, you know, attacking trans kids, it's the family down the street doing their best to support their child who just happens to be transgender. And this family is struggling without education, without a lot of support, because they love their kid so much. They're going to protect their kid no matter how that child identifies. And that family and that kid, they go to your church, they're your coworkers, they're in the PTA, they play with your kids. It's not this abstract concept, it's your own neighborhood. So that's how we use that messaging. We do it in a policy arena, and then we start coming around and saying, now, you've got to elect people who hold these values as well. So that's kind of how we've done that messaging, how it continues to work.
Thank you, Jeff. Telling our story is always the most important thing we can do as LGBT members. And next is Martha. Martha, please.
Hi there, Jeff. I think you may have already started answering my question, but that's really great. It was so, by the way, I'm the co-chair of the Global LGBT Caucus at Democrats Abroad, and I'm also part of the voter protection team globally at DA, and we work together a lot with Georgia during the election in November to make sure that every single vote got in. So we really appreciate your work and all the work that was done in Georgia, and we're really happy to be a part of it. I think we had at least 11,000 votes from abroad that came into Georgia in November. So our struggle is your struggle. So I just was wondering, you know, as we're, you know, bringing in all of those extra votes from abroad, and we're also in this call, we're an LGBT community, if you could speak something to say something to like how we, what your views are, and how as we as LGBT Americans abroad can support expanding voting rights and expanding the electorate and getting Democrats elected.
Yeah, well, you know, certainly it's making sure that you vote. It is supporting the efforts in your own local communities, not just being an active voter, but an active participant in the process. And I would say one of the keys to that, again, it's looking at multiple election cycles, but it's not forgetting those local races, because that's where it all starts. If we can't elect people to a city council or a county commission, that's where we build our bench. We've got to start there. And too many voters, just in general, don't participate in those races. Here in the city of Atlanta, we're going to be having municipal elections later this year. If we can get, 40% of the voters to actually vote in the city of Atlanta election, that's a good year. You know, it's just people don't do that, and so that's where that apathy starts. So especially, I think those of you who are Democrats abroad, one, make sure that you're voting in all of those races where you are able to, but then I think create a culture within the global community of Democrats throughout the world, that it may be a bit more challenging to remember to vote in those local elections, but the importance of doing that is there. And even if you can't necessarily vote in all of those elections, find some of those candidates and donate to them. as well. It's nothing against the federal party or the national candidates, but that's always where so much big money goes. And so many of these smaller races, frankly, can be won or lost by donations of just a few $1,000s.
Sure. Yeah, that's really terrific. I'm not sure if Georgia is one of the states that lets us vote all the way down ballot, but that's certainly something we'll work on to expand the right of people who are abroad to vote down ballot. But that's a great idea to donate locally to those kind of races. Thanks for that.
Thank you, Martha. Next we have is Sally.
Hi, thank you, Jeff. I wondered if you would talk a little bit about the voter suppression efforts and what your coalition is going to be doing to overturn the most recent law in Georgia and any other states. I know Wisconsin, where I vote, has also had voter suppression efforts succeed.
Yeah. Frankly, the way we overturn them is perhaps by the courts, but more importantly, we have to overturn them by getting new leadership in place. And so there are a couple of organizations, again, to name drop Stacey Abrams, her current family of organizations, Fair Fight Action. They're really leading on along with ACLU of Georgia and some other organizations kind of on that legal front to do legal challenges. So that's going to be incredibly important. What I keep reminding my team, what we're talking about within our coalitions is that we have to continue, we have to push through. We need to educate voters on the fact that these voter suppression laws are in place. But frankly, it becomes a bit of a balancing act in terms of messaging when it comes election time, because we have learned that if we talk too much too close to an election about how hard it is to vote, that we can actually begin to suppress the vote ourselves. And so we need to be very aware of that. We need to make sure that we are supporting efforts such as members of the faith community here in Georgia that will go out and hand out water and risk arrest doing that. But at the same time, we need to just continue to do what we know has been successful in 2018, 2019, 2020. We'll see that hopefully in these races in 2021. And that's where we will go into 2022. I actually was at a presentation earlier today, and in terms of the electorate, the number of newly registered voters that have come out, we know that there are still more likely Democratic voters, several 100,000, frankly, likely Democratic voters that did not vote in 2020. So we need to continue to reach them and get them to come out in 2022. We need to make sure that these voter suppression efforts are not successful. And we can build this infrastructure, and we must work around them. So the question of how will we overturn them? Yes, we need to work to fight that, but we also need to have enough people focused on this that some group of us, we're just in a different lane completely. We're just going to focus on getting that voter turnout, not overturning those bad laws, because we have to and we can continue to mobilize voters, even in the face of these bad laws.
Thank you for that. Next is Stephen Miller. Stephen.
Hi, I just wanted to emphasize, I've been a member of Democrats Abroad Italy since 2008. I've been working on voter protection work in North Carolina since 2008. One thing I'll just share from my own experience, I've made it a part of my life to kind of schedule a few weeks around all the major elections to go back to the US and work in North Carolina. I've been doing work in North Carolina for voter protection for over a decade. And for us living abroad, if you're in a position to go back during election times and actually get out, knock on doors, talk to people, there are ways, if you can do that, that it really makes a difference. What I've learned over the last election cycle, I've been going to a lot of meetings within North Carolina online, and we've actually had Stacey Abrams speak to us a few times, is that, as I think Jeff said, between the elections, the things we can do from abroad are to, first of all, support partisan and nonpartisan groups, not just the Democratic groups, but groups on the ground. Like for me in North Carolina, there are groups that are working in penetrating communities where people have not traditionally voted, going out during the years between the elections, meeting with them, talking to them, engaging with them on the interests that they have. One thing that we're doing in North Carolina right now, there was one state legislator who won, a Democrat, was the only Democrat who took a red seat, and completely unexpectedly in one county. He's Latino. He was not expected to win, and when he won, everyone's now talking to him about how he did it. And he did exactly what Jeff is saying. He spent the year up to the election meeting people, going out, going to their homes, talking to them. And what they're looking for now are volunteers, and we can do this from abroad as well, to call constituents, and he's going to be running again in 2022, call constituents that they ask us to call to help them understand how to sign up for their vaccines for COVID, and to talk to them as representatives of this legislator and saying, we're working for Ricky Hurtado. We're calling you to help you figure out where and how to get your vaccines if you're interested, and building trust between these Democratic local legislators who are running, candidates who are running, and their community, so that when the election comes, we've already built up that support rather than waiting till a few months before the election. So there are groups we can volunteer for from outside the US to help with phone banking, text banking, and follow their lead locally on how they're building the community strength they need to win in the election. You know, for people to look out for those opportunities in states they're interested in.
Great. So that was more of a statement. Thank you so much, Stephen, for that, but a very helpful statement. So really do appreciate all your efforts that you do with Democrats Abroad, and hello from Paris to Italy. Next we have is Patrick. Question, please.
Yeah, thanks. I'm sorry, I'm asking multiple questions, but
please.
I'm curious in Georgia, not just with the most recent voter kind of suppression legislation, but a couple of years back, there was some, I don't remember the specifics, but some abortion funding or Planned Parenthood, something that raised the ire of the world. And there was a lot of corporate pressure, Delta, Coca-Cola, Hollywood, you know, moving all-star games out of the state. Do you, as a Georgia insider, think that is it just lip service, or does it have any impact?
Oh yeah, no, it has impact. It definitely has impact, and you know, I'll quote Stacey. You know, let's be careful about asking everybody to leave the state of Georgia who is a progressive, because that is not exactly the message that we want to send. But bringing it back to kind of LGBTQ space where I really work. What happened in North Carolina when they passed their ban on transgender folks using the restroom of choice, which also was what made more complicated than that. But that's the soundbite. That's what was in people's minds. And you know, North Carolina, there were immediately boycotts. What happened with that is that the Georgia Chamber of Commerce and the Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce, they did their own economic analysis on that, because we were having the same fights around religious freedom laws in Georgia. And they were very concerned that if we had a bad bill in Georgia, we would lose between $1 and $2 billion in economic impact in the first year alone. And so it brought the corporate community off of the sidelines and into the fight. What has solidified that even more is we work a lot with employee groups to then go to their executives. Again, one of the themes is that it is trickle up. It is the power of the grassroots at all different levels of going up the leadership ladder, up the decision-making chain, to say, you know, Corporation X, you have excellent benefits to me as an employee, but I'm only yours 40 hours a week. I need to still live here. My family still needs to live here. I want my family to visit. I want this to have a good quality of life. When it is suppressive and hostile to me and my family, to my community, and that's not just LGBTQ, that's more broad than that. That impacts everybody's quality of life, and we no longer want to be here. That's what then really solidifies corporate opposition to the voter suppression. That's what you're seeing going on right now. I think this is why you saw some of the big corporations were trying to kind of play a middle ground. When our legislation passed, they realized that they couldn't. Unfortunately, they realized that they couldn't after it had been signed into law. But I think to everybody's credit, because I know that in real time, I think all of us were shocked. The bill that ultimately passed here in Georgia, there was a lot of bills that had been discussed, but the bill that ultimately, the language that ultimately passed, it was introduced in one chamber in the morning, went to the next chamber in the afternoon, and the governor signed it by 6:30 that night. It was rushed through. And it was rushed through to the point that very few people knew everything that was in there. And then on top of that, there was a young, queer, Black legislator who wanted to go to the signing ceremony, because signing ceremonies are almost always open to the public. And so she knocked on the door of the governor's office to see if she could be let in, and they dragged her off in handcuffs and charged her with 2 felony obstruction charges that were dropped. But so suddenly it outraged people. It was this visual representation of what was going on: a rushed bill, a young Black woman getting arrested for knocking on a door, and a bill that, yes, this is not the worst part of it, giving out water, but it's an example of how mean-spirited this legislation and this law really is. And that's what stuck in people's minds. That's why corporations are now getting involved to try to stop this from happening around the country. And so be aware of those efforts. Watch what the corporate community is doing. Support those corporations. Send them a good email. Once they sign a letter and get off the sidelines, encourage other corporations to get on board with this, and point out that it is around corporate responsibility. And it's not just donating to a good foods program or helping a local school. Good citizenship is making sure that all of us, our right to vote is respected.
Thank you for that, Jeff. All right, checking on the time. Our last question for the night will be from Martha.
Okay, thanks, Juan. Just to wrap up, I had one more question, Jeff, about how we as Americans abroad, there's 6 million of us of voting age, can help pass the Equality Act. And if you have any advice, we have voters in all 50 states. We're collecting stories and letters from voters, and we want to find like the most effective ways to have our voices be heard and to get those letters across to our representatives. And we're just wondering how organizations like yours, how we can support you.
Yeah. So first off, it's really recognizing we need to get 10 Republican senators on board. Unless the filibuster goes away, that's a slightly different conversation. And so if there's efforts if there really is momentum and efforts to do away with the filibuster, you may want to consider supporting that. But to specifically answer the question of the Equality Act, we have to find 10 Republican votes at this point in time. I believe it can happen, but there are Republican senators in states like Utah, like Florida, like North Carolina, that may be persuadable. And so the best way to find out what is going on is if you do not have a relationship with the organizations on the ground. There is a national organization called the Equality Federation. Mm-hmm. And they are kind of the national association. All of us are statewide groups. We're all independent. We're not chapters of the Equality Federation, but the Equality Federation supports us as we do work around the country. And so you can go to that one website to find out the contact information of the state in which you are from. and or the state that you are registered to vote in. And you can then connect with that organization, ask what they're doing, and then support their efforts. But right now, there's a lot of focus on trying to secure those 10 Republican votes so that we can actually get that passed. I'm working on an editorial that hopefully will get placed in Politico or some other publication really soon that talks about the importance of us as members of the LGBTQ community to reach across the aisle and talk to Republicans around this. It's what passed the Voting Rights Act. It's what passed the Civil Rights Act originally. And as part of our research into that editorial, the first non-discrimination bill was introduced in the US Congress in 1974, which is, I'm afraid to say, because it makes me feel really old, but that's almost 50 years ago. We have been fighting for our equality for almost 50 years. We cannot wait 50 more. Now is the time. Now we need to do this. And so it's really pushing that sense of urgency and making sure that the Republicans especially hear that this is about basic fairness. This is not about athletes and scholarships. This is about basic fairness. This is about the American values that you all, as people who live abroad, are probably in a better position than anyone else to talk about what it means to be proud to be an American, and what a strong democracy does to strengthen our global footprint, and all of those talking points that, again, you all are the experts on that. Lean in on that. Use your expertise. Tell your stories. And specifically, don't be afraid to tell them to Republican senators. They're the ones who right now need to hear it more than anybody else.
Great, thanks. And would love to see that article when it gets published, that op-ed that you're working on. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much, Jeff. We really want to say thank you for really inspirational and very knowledgeable information you're providing us. So we want to say thank you, and for all the great work that you're doing on the ground. We really appreciate it. As someone who grew up in California, small town, I can definitely relate growing up. Thank you so much. Really do appreciate all the work you do. So thank you. We'd like to, you have any last words you would like to leave with us, Jeff, for the group before we
again, hopefully, because I didn't drop things into the chat. I'm still working on trying to be an octopus so that I can do these multiple things, but certainly anyone who would like to support our work in Georgia, georgiaequality.org, love to have your financial support is always important to us. Your volunteer support can help us. That's what created our wins in January, but also understand the importance of supporting your own local LGBTQ organizations. The national organizations are great and wonderful. We all benefit from them, but all politics truly is local. And if change doesn't happen where in the communities that we call home, it's never really going to happen on a federal basis. So thanks so much for allowing me to be with you this evening.
Thank you again. Thank you again, Jeff. Again, it was georgiaequality.com and also Fair Fight.
.org.
I'm sorry, apologize.
Yep. And fairfight.org as well.
Thank you so much for that correction. All right, Brett, I leave it up to you. You want to unmute? Unmute, Brett, unmute.
Sorry, rookie mistake. Thank you. I just want to say, I hope you've enjoyed our meeting with Jeff. And Jeff, thank you so much. I'm so happy you could join us. And please know that you're welcome to come back anytime, and anything that we can do to help keep Georgia blue, just let us know. Also, I want to thank you for everyone here that came. As always, we appreciate your support. And please go to democrats.org/donate so that we can continue that work. As mentioned earlier, there are a few more events in our April is Voting Rights Month. Just go to our website at democratsabroad.org.uk, our events, and you can see a couple more events that are coming up tomorrow night and another one on Monday. There is also, yes, Paris and Vienna chapters are hosting a Solidarity Sundays this Sunday. And do you have the address for that you can post? Thank you very much. And then last, but certainly not least, I would like to invite everyone to contribute as a volunteer. The work starts today to ensure that we grow our vote for midterms and beyond. You can sign up again at democratsabroad.org/volunteer, and new first-time volunteers are always welcome. With that, I'm going to say goodbye to the festivities, and thank you again to Betsy for monitoring the chat room, for Juan for hosting, and Jeff for speaking, and to everyone else, thank you very much. Good night.
Thanks. Thanks, Brett. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye-bye.
How do I turn off recording?
Brett.
There it is.